If you depend on safe travel, reliable emergency response, or steady government services, this is something you should be watching closely. Congress has not approved new funding for the Department of Homeland Security. If lawmakers don't reach an agreement before the deadline, a partial shutdown will begin. That doesn't mean airports close or agents disappear from their posts. It means many of them will still show up to work, but without pay. And this is where it becomes more complicated than the headlines suggest. Some funding rules allow essential services to continue. At the same time, other programs can quietly slow down: disaster preparedness planning, cybersecurity training, long-term recovery coordination, Coast Guard maintenance. If you don't understand how these pieces overlap, you might miss early warning signs that could affect your travel plans, your local economy, or emergency response in your community. Before we go further, think about this. When you hear the phrase, government shutdown, do you imagine everything grinding to a halt? Or do you assume most things keep running? That perception really matters. Let's break it down. A partial shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security means Congress failed to pass funding for that specific department before the deadline. Other federal agencies may still be funded. So this isn't a full government shutdown, it's narrower. But DHS is a massive agency. It includes immigration enforcement, airport security, the Coast Guard, FEMA for disaster response, cybersecurity teams, and the Secret Service. Here's the key point. When funding lapses, essential employees are still required to work. That includes TSA agents, Border Patrol officers, Coast Guard members, and Secret Service protection teams. They must report for duty, but they don't receive paychecks until Congress resolves the funding gap. Pause for a second and think about that. Imagine going to work for weeks while your paycheck is delayed. Rent is still due. Groceries still cost money. Childcare bills don't pause. The financial and emotional pressure builds. During past shutdowns, TSA reported higher absentee rates. Some employees sought second jobs. When that happens, airport lines can grow longer. Delays increase. The ripple effect spreads beyond the airport. This shutdown is also tied to a broader policy dispute, particularly around immigration enforcement. The immediate catalyst was a tragic incident in Minneapolis involving federal immigration agents, which sparked renewed calls for reform. Senate Democrats have proposed changes such as banning masked agents, requiring visible identification, mandating body cameras, tightening use of force standards, and limiting enforcement near schools and hospitals. Republicans and the Trump administration argue that enforcement flexibility is essential for public safety and that masks protect agents from harassment and doxing. At its core, this raises a larger question. Who sets the rules for immigration enforcement, Congress through legislation, or the executive branch through agency policy? This is where the power of the purse comes in. Congress controls funding. Lawmakers can say, "We won't fund the department unless certain changes are made." It's a powerful negotiating tool, but it comes with risk. While political leaders debate, real people continue working without pay. Here's another twist. Immigration enforcement operations may not slow dramatically during this shutdown. That's because a previous tax and spending law, sometimes referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, allocated tens of billions of dollars to immigration agencies. That funding cushion allows some enforcement activities to continue even during an appropriations lapse. So you end up with a paradox. The policy fight centers on immigration enforcement, yet those operations may continue more smoothly than disaster planning or cybersecurity training. Now let's talk about FEMA. FEMA handles disaster response for hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and other emergencies. During a shutdown, immediate life-saving operations continue. But planning, training, long-term recovery coordination, and grant processing can slow down. If you live in a disaster-prone area, preparedness matters. It's not something you want pause. Cybersecurity is another quiet concern. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency focuses on protecting power grids, hospitals, transportation systems, and financial networks from digital threats. During a shutdown, they prioritize active threats. But proactive measures, training exercises, vulnerability assessments, prevention programs, can be delayed. Those gaps may not make headlines right away, but over time they can weaken preparedness. Then there's the Coast Guard. They handle maritime safety, search and rescue, vessel inspections, and port security. Non-essential missions pause during a shutdown. Maintenance and training may be deferred. Delays in vessel inspections can slow shipping and impact commerce, costing businesses money. So what does this mean for you? If you're flying, you probably won't see immediate chaos. TSA agents will still be at checkpoints. But if absentee rates rise, wait times could increase. If your community relies on FEMA coordination, grant processing or long-term recovery could move more slowly. If you work in shipping, maritime industries, or federal contracting tied to DHS, you may notice operational slowdowns. And if you're a DHS employee or contractor, this situation is deeply personal. Even though Congress typically approves back pay after a shutdown ends, that doesn't help when bills are due today. Cash flow interruptions create real stress. Zooming out, this is the third funding lapse in roughly 5 months. That pattern suggests something important. Budget negotiations are increasingly being used as leverage in policy disputes. Historically, shutdowns were rare and politically costly. Now they happen more often, which can erode morale among federal workers and weaken public trust in government stability. From a practical standpoint, especially if you're a federal worker or contractor, this underscores the importance of an emergency fund. Financial planners typically recommend 3 to 6 months of expenses. In uncertain times, leaning toward the higher end can provide added peace of mind. Even if you're not directly affected, it's worth understanding how interconnected these systems are. Airport delays impact business travel. Delayed disaster recovery affects local economies. Cybersecurity slowdowns can ripple into financial systems. Government operations may feel distant, but their effects are not. There's also a broader constitutional debate here about separation of powers. Should immigration enforcement be shaped primarily by executive discretion within existing laws? Or should Congress set more detailed guardrails through legislation? That conversation won't end when this shutdown does. What happens next depends on negotiations. Lawmakers have left Washington for recess but remain on call. Sometimes these standoffs resolve quickly with a temporary funding extension. Other times they drag on. The longer the gap lasts, the more pressure builds. Public opinion can influence outcomes. If voters strongly oppose shutdown tactics, lawmakers may feel compelled to compromise. If voters strongly support using funding as leverage for reform, that also shapes negotiations. Here's the balanced takeaway. When you hear government shutdown, it doesn't usually mean everything collapses overnight. Essential services continue. Planes still take off. Borders remain monitored. Disaster responders answer calls. But the strain behind the scenes is real. It shows up in delayed programs, rising stress, morale challenges, and quiet slowdowns that accumulate over time. It's easy to panic. It's also easy to dismiss it as political theater. The truth sits somewhere in the middle. Stay informed. Understand what's actually happening. And respond calmly rather than emotionally. That perspective, grounded and balanced, is always a better place to operate from.